Let's cover some of the things we might want to do to add to an animation. Let's start with adding sound effects. If we go up here to animation frames, we see this animation includes these 0, 1, 2, so 3 frames that are being used. But you can use the same frame repeatedly. As you can see, we're using idle 1 twice in the animation. But if you look down here at the sound effects, if I add a sound effect to this idle one by double clicking here, and I'll just pick this random sound effect. See if you can hear that. Okay, so we have that sound effect. We can adjust its volume, make it a little quieter, and select done. And now we have this sound effect Bird Coo 1 playing at volume 64% in this idle one frame. If we click down here, this idle one, we see there's no sound being played, because obviously you might not want to trigger a sound at every use of a frame. So this way you trigger it only in the second, or it's numerically frame number 1 you play the sound, but not in frame number 3, which happens to be referencing the same frame image, basically. I hope that makes sense. So that's all you have to do. You pick which frame animation you want to trigger a sound. You pick which of the 4 sound channels you want to use to play your sound, and you just double click on it in the list, and any sound file that you've placed in that folder called sound in your project folder will show up here, and you simply select it, click listen if you want to listen to it, tweak its volume, and click done. And lastly, you can also use the listen button here to play the sound you have selected, and if you right click on that button, it'll play all of the sounds for that frame simultaneously, so you can hear how it would appear in an actual game engine. Lastly, you can select one or more sounds from the list and use these buttons here to tweak how loud or how quiet they are. And that's it for adding sounds. One of the other things we might want to edit that will affect gameplay would be collision rectangles. So let's quickly cover that again. So we go here to our collision rectangle list, we make sure Make Visible is selected, and we click on this create icon, and that brings up the dialog, and it creates that red rectangle by default. And usually you want your character to be able to be hit by enemy projectiles and collide with enemies and stuff. So we can, for instance, create a collision rectangle called bottom, and choose whatever color we want. Let's make it a more neutral and pleasant color like blue. And we could tweak the placement with these buttons and the position of these buttons, but I think it's a lot more natural and quicker to select it from the list, click on the frame preview window, and then use the arrow keys, or actually not the arrow keys, I'm sorry, the W, S, A, and D keys to place it, and then hold shift and use those same W, S, A, and D keys to tweak the size. So I'm just using those W, S, A, and D keys and shift to tweak the size of my collision rectangle, and there we go. And I can create as many of these collision rectangles as I want to. I'll just create a second one. Let's say he was attacking with his sword. Red seems like a pretty good color for an attack. We can call this attack, and we will give it a numeric value of 10 arbitrarily. Let's just say that it can do 10 points of damage in this frame, and click done. And again, just use those WSAD. You do have to click on the frame preview window once you've selected it in the list, so that you can start moving it around. And let's say the sword were sticking out here, and then I would hold shift and press D, press and hold D to stretch it that way, W to stretch it upward. There we go, let's say it were about there. And that's how I would do that. And as you can see, it gives you the name of the rectangle and the numeric value of the rectangle. And when you pick any particular rectangle, that rectangle flashes, so you know which one you would be editing. And that's it for collision rectangles. Another gameplay related thing that you might want to add to a frame is an action point. To use the example I had used before, let's say we want this character to be able to shoot fireballs out of his sword. We can make an action point in the frame we desire. Let's say we'll call it Fireball. And we can choose from 3 different visual styles. It's entirely up to the programmer of the game engine that you're using whether or not the type means anything, but it's just there more than anything for you to be able to visually organize your different action points that you use in a frame. I can click Set New Position, set the action point, click Done, and once it is, you can see it's in this list here. Once I've created it, you can select it, select Frame Preview, and again the W, S, A, and D keys will help you position that exactly where you need it. Okay, so now we have this one frame that has the frame itself made up of images, and it also includes collision rectangles and action points. And if you recall, you cannot select a collision rectangle or an action point. See, I tried to and I selected the sword image. You cannot select them by clicking on them within the editor. The way you need to select action points or collision rectangles is to click them within the list. However, let's say you want to move everything in a frame, not just the images but the collision rectangles and action points, to basically adjust its placement relative to its XY coordinate within a game. So the way you would do that is use Control A in the frame preview, and that selects everything, and then use the W, S, A, and D keys